bigger portions. The coffee was beginning to get cold. I drummed my fingers impatiently on the table. He'd be coming. He had to come. My gut was right. A bespectacled man with a few strands on what was on its way to becoming a mustache sat on his upper lip. His forehead gleamed with perspiration. I presented a friendly smile to acknowledge his arrival. "Morning," he mumbled, hastily taking a seat in a matter of seconds. He fished out a small plastic box with a piece of meat inside. The blood from the meat stained the inner wall like paint. I opened the box and pressed the meat with my thumb. No depressions. I placed it into my briefcase. "Nothing left that can be drawn back to you?" I asked warily. He nodded. "How's Jennifer?" I asked. "I took care of her too. No messes," he murmured, picking at his finger. That was when I noticed it, the bandage that was tied awkwardly around his wrist. "Where did you get that?" I asked, my eyebrows beginning to furrow. He bit his lip, and sweat began to roll down the sides of his face. "Where did you get that?" I asked again. This time it was more of an accusatory assertion in my tone. "Jennifer." She scratched me. "It wasn't that big." "Come on," I groaned, slamming my fist onto the table. A few stairs were drawn. I lowered my head and spoke again. "You were careless." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I took a deep breath and reached into my pocket for the photograph. I passed it to him. It was a clear portrait of a cherubic girl's face. "I sent you her address on email. Her name is Lisa. Make sure nothing happens this time," I said, jabbing my index finger at his plastered wrist. He nodded once more and stood up. "Oh," I said quickly, before he had a chance to leave. "Get me bigger portions next time." "Yeah," he replied. He spun around and left. I grinned. Today was going to be a good day. I stood up and made my way towards where I worked. I entered the gates. My short hello was good enough a greeting for the stocky guard that sat lazily on his stool. He waved his pudgy fingers at me as acknowledgement. As I looked up at the grand assembly hall, I carelessly bumped into someone. I looked down, my face contorted into pleasant surprise. It was a girl. She clutched her bag that slung on her shoulders tightly. Her ponytail, her face, everything was quite the style. Her cheeks were rosy, and so were her eyes. She was pretty, no doubt. "Morning, Mr. Cleve. I'm Gina, the new student in your class. Since Jennifer, she stammered. "I understand. You're lucky I didn't assign any homework on my last lesson," I smiled. She laughed. "Yes, I just wanted to say hello. See you in class later, Mr. Cleve." I waved at her as she skipped away. I stopped, smiling. I took out my mobile phone and dialed a number. The number. "Forget Lisa," I said, as I walked briskly to the assembly hall. "There's a new girl today, and she's perfect. Look out for any updates I'll send to you." I placed my phone back into my pocket. I couldn't help but grin again. Lots of girls disappear. Lots of girls run away from home. Lots of girls get involved in accidents, especially girls who are new to an environment. They won't suspect a thing. Blind date. At one point in my life, I was a serial killer. I claimed 18 victims in my spree around the New York City metropolitan area. My method was simple: arrange meetings with women from dating websites like eHarmony and Match.com under a false name, eventually lure them to my home or a secluded place, then hold them down and carefully dissect them. I love separating the organs from one another, removing the heart first so that there wasn't much struggling through the process. It was quite a joy, one that I would be continuing if it weren't for my meeting Stephanie Donati. It was supposed to be just another easy murder. The woman seemed desperate enough. Stephanie was quite a beauty, I admit. Stunning, actually. Raven black hair, emerald green eyes, tall, thin but curvy, and a nice sized bust. I was wondering what she was doing on a dating website. The second I saw her enter Luigi's, a high-end eatery I very much enjoyed. She sat down and we spoke of nonsense for the first 20 minutes or so before our appetizers came. The entire time I was staring at her chest. Her cleavage revealed a very low-cut, skin-tight, blue and silver dress. When our appetizers arrived, I found that she had quite an appetite for such a good-looking girl, quickly scoffing down the majority of the dish. I didn't think anything of it. I was still taken aback by her beauty and, admittedly, fantasizing not only of having sex with her, but of dissecting her. We finished our meal after another hour and a half or so. I had a nice porterhouse and she had filet mignon, bloody. I decided to play my hand and ask if she would like to come back to my place. Noticing she was very much inebriated from the various wines we ordered, she agreed, and I could feel my pants tighten. Perhaps I would have sex with this one before the act. No, I couldn't. I'd leave DNA. Unless I burned her after. I'd be a bit out of the ordinary, but I think I could do it. I opened the door for her and we entered a cab to leave towards my house. When we got there, things got hot quick. She was all over me and I was perfectly okay with it. She began to please me orally, but then an idea popped into my head. I told her I was going to grab a condom, and I did. But I also picked up my butterfly dagger and hid it in my right fist before walking back into the bedroom to kill the very beautiful girl who sat waiting there. I climbed over her and pushed into her. While she was enjoying the feeling, I opened my butterfly blade and dug it deep into her chest. She let out a blood-curdling scream, which just served to turn me on even more. I began repeatedly stabbing her, matching the stabs with my thrusts. I could feel her going limp under me. Being quite satisfied, I climbed off her. It was time to dissect the girl. A smile crossed my face. I wanted to do it again, but this was already daring enough. I didn't want to take any chances. Then I heard something that made a chill run down my spine. She began to laugh. Not just a laugh, but a cackle. One that's made by a very old woman who found something so incredibly funny that they are straining their fading vocal cords. The woman began to sit up, her head hanging back as she rose, letting it fall forward when she was straight up. She had a wide smile painted on her face, and her eyes were black, blacker than night itself. She opened her mouth, and I stood there in shock. Her mouth began to widen, larger and larger, stretching far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. I could feel myself fall into the black abyss that soon surrounded me. I'm not quite sure where I ended up, but I awoke sitting in nothing but black. I could hear voices around me everywhere, but I was too scared to call out to them. I attempted to stand up, but found I could not. In fact, I realised I wasn't sitting at all. I was floating. Where the hell was I? I began to listen to the voices more and more, gathering certain sentences being repeated in various languages. I'm sorry, you're stuck here too. I finally heard an English voice call out somewhere to my left. I called back out to him, but it seemed we were too far to hear each other. Perhaps we floated away. It took me a very long time to realise what happened. Bumping into a few English-speaking men along the way, one of them claimed to be from England, circa 1696. I assume Stephanie was not human at all. I assume she was much like me, a killer, but not a human. Whatever she was immortal. She was immortal, and she trapped men here in this black abyss. How? I'm not sure. I think she swallowed me. Every now and then, however, a great light will fill the area, and we will see a new man fall to join us in the darkness. We all will, the thousands of us, floating in this endless void, undying for eternity. This is a warning. Don't ask me how I got this out. It took a group effort and a good 10 years. I'm assuming this, but I lost track of time, waiting for the light to open when I was closest to it. Please, I know I'm not a good man. I know I may deserve this, but you don't. Be wary of who you bring home. Be wary of that beautiful girl who's just so interested in you. You never know if she is Stephanie Donati. I don't even know if there are more like her. For all I know, there could be thousands. Call me tomorrow, okay? Still no messages on my phone. I guess he wasn't going to call me back after all. I can't really blame him. Maybe I came on a bit too fast yesterday. I noticed him long before he noticed me. His shiny black hair and unnatural blue eyes. I wasn't the only one watching him, that's for sure. His movements were elegant in a boyish way. And his smile, I would die for that smile. Still no messages. I thought about calling him, maybe apologise for going too fast yesterday. I'm a coward, I know, but I just couldn't bring myself to dial his number. Besides, he promised he'd call me when he was ready. So I'll wait. I'm patient. I know. I'll just casually stroll past his house, just to see if he's home. Maybe he's out. That would explain why he couldn't call me yet. He only lives half an hour away anyway. Maybe he's shy and is scared to call me. Silly boy. I'll go to him and tell him that he doesn't have to be scared, that I don't mind if he needs time. He lives pretty secluded in a farm on the outskirts of town. I can hear the sheep in the stables as I approach. My heart skips when I see there are lights burning inside. He must be there. He told me yesterday his parents would be gone for the weekend. They left him to look after the sheep for those days. Poor baby. That must be hard work. He was probably just too busy to call me. I'll have to stay here until his parents come back and help him take care of all those sheep. I knock on the door, but he doesn't answer. Maybe he fell asleep. The thought of his beautiful face, even more softened by sleep, makes me smile. I try the door. It's unlocked. There's hardly any crime around here, so I guess locking the door is not needed. I try to be as quiet as possible as I sneak through the house. I want to surprise him. I cringe at every creak the stairs make as I climb them. Finally, I've reached the bedroom and I carefully open the door. There he is, lying in bed as I thought. Quietly, I switch on the nightlight on his desk so I can see his face. His blue eyes are open, staring into space, and his whole face is one bloody mess. His cheeks have been carved, the skin mostly removed and hanging loose on the sides of his face. He's missing his fingernails. They are laid out on the bed, carefully arranged. On his bare chest, words are carved. I look at him, my hands covering my mouth. He's still the same as I left him yesterday. He must have been so tired that he slept all day. How cute. I softly kiss his forehead, making sure I don't wake him. Then I write another message below the one on his chest, letting him know I'm here when he needs me. I leave the room, heading back outside. I think it's time for the sheep to go to sleep, and tomorrow I'll introduce myself to his parents. I'm sure they'll love me too. Come in, we're open. The bell above the open sign dinged against the glass as I walked through the door of the old convenience store. It sounded faint and somehow distant, and I suspect the little clapper inside had long since been eroded away by the countless customers circling in and out. Still, it served its purpose, and I was soon greeted by the man at the counter. It would be wrong to say the man was old. He was in that stage where he had begun to show signs of wrinkles, but his hair was still a solid brown, and his body was tall and trim. But amidst the details of the aging store, the vintage refrigerators, leaking fluid, the faded neon lights, advertising cigarettes, he seemed oddly out of place. "How do you do?" he asked in a startlingly upbeat tone. The way he grinned while saying it unsettled me. I was vaguely reminded of how the Cheshire Cat used to smile from cheek to cheek, but this was more of an elongated smirk, one that said, "You have no clue what you're in for." Indeed, I hadn't. "I'm well, thanks. I'm new to this place, so I was hoping you could direct me to what I need." "Sure thing," he said excitedly. "What are you looking for? We've got everything you could ever need here." "Herbs, mainly," I replied. "I'm looking to make a stew to serve a dinner party." "Rosemary? That'll do as well." "That'll be in the canned goods section. Follow me, ma'am," he sang, and hopped over the counter with surprising agility. He pointed towards the first aisle and strolled in front of me, whistling happily. I looked up. The sign read "Commodities." I guess we were taking the long way round. As I rounded the corner, I was startled by another woman who was just exiting the aisle. She quickly shuffled past me, but I was able to grab a brief glance at her face. Her hair was grey and messy, with its ends cut to uneven levels. Her cheeks looked old and sunken, and her skin was deathly pale, but her eyes were what caught my gaze. They were young, blue and glistening, but wide open, in a state of permanent shock. Yet her gaze was hollow like the bell on the door. I don't think anything could have prepared me for what was around that corner. As soon as I walked into the aisle, I knew something was wrong. That's actually not quite accurate. What I meant to say was, it was blatantly obvious that this was not normal under any circumstances. Instead of your usual toys and seasonal goods lining the shelves, there was only one thing, or rather several things. Babies, human babies, all just sitting there in the long locked cages, doing things that babies do, as if this was a perfectly ordinary situation. Some were crying, others were sleeping. Looking at it from the front of the store, I couldn't distinguish any pattern, but as I followed the man, I realised that the ones on the left were male and the ones on the right were female. They also increased with size as it continued. Underneath the cages were tiny labels, like you'd normally find in a convenience store. I leaned in and examined one at random. Age 12 weeks, height 61 centimeters, weight 4.5 kilograms, gender female, race Caucasian mix, defects none, price negotiable. Bewildered, I walked further down the aisle and picked another label under a much larger baby boy. Age 10 months, height 80 centimeters, weight 9 kilos, gender male, race African American, defects Tourette's syndrome, hyperhidrosis, $1,699.99. Unsettled, I picked up my pace to meet the man at the end of the long stretch. "Are there parents here?" I asked, curious. As a mother myself, it was unnatural to see so many children without a parent or supervisor. "Well, she's always here," he laughed. "Ah, that's right, I forgot. You're new. Never mind." "Who takes care of them?" I asked. "Our staff is specialised in childcare, best in the business, although you'd expect them to be, considering the company incentives." He poked me with his shoulder at this comment. "Nah. But they get sustenance and cleaning, and as is necessary, need to keep them presentable. In any case, would you be at all interested in an extra purchase?" He gestured toward the aisle with his thumb. No thanks," I said, beginning to walk around the next corner. Above it was a sign that read, "Toiletries." "Go on," the man said excitedly. A rather disgruntled looking employee exited the opposite way, the first I'd seen in the entire store. I stepped around the corner and was immediately greeted by the most pungent scent I'd ever encountered in my life. It stunk to such a degree that my sense of smell was instantly overpowered. One step later, I found the source. I'd never seen the human centipede before, but something told me this wasn't far off. Rows and rows of men and women stood where shelves have been, all unclothed and all perched above a giant trench, and every single one of them was shitting. It was the most obscene thing I'd ever seen in my life, although it was certainly not the most surreal thing I'd see that day. The man saw my reaction and said, "Yeah, most newcomers have that look too. Once you come here enough though, you'll learn to get used to it. It's okay, we can skip this one if you want. I don't blame you." I stuck by his side and we walked past. Before it went out of view, however, I caught a glimpse of their faces. I hadn't noticed them before, having been distracted by the odour. They were all looking at me with their mouths gagged and their eyes tearing, as if they were crying for help. The next aisle was labelled frozen goods, and I tried to imagine what twisted interpretation lay behind the corner. Dead bodies on meat hooks, people encased in ice, their blood solid from the cold. As it turns out, I wasn't far off the mark. There were lines of freezers, and inside each was an array of bodily organs, organised and sorted by size and type. Lungs, kidneys and hearts were laid on shelves with prices I could see, ranging upwards of $10,000. Normally, our products were only available through the black market and the deep web, the man stated. Of course, we didn't want to be associated with any illegal activities, and when certain circumstances come to rise, we were able to set up this here store. He smiled, waving his arms and rotating as he took in his work. "So, you're implying this is legal?" I questioned, shuddering. "Yep, 100%. Everyone here abides by rules and regulations. We like to think of ourselves as a community here. Of course, we do have the occasional outlier who snaps, but we provide paid leave for such situations, as per the government's orders," he chuckled. "And why wouldn't we? The FDA's one of our biggest customers. Somehow, this didn't surprise me. We swiftly passed through the freezer aisle and moved on to the next. This one was labelled dried goods. I played the guessing game again. Shriveled corpses, dehydrated organs. Both, as a matter of fact. They were hanging from hooks and were separated into limbs, head, torso, and all the organs that didn't require freezing. The faces were distorted into blobs with empty glaring eye sockets that seemed to suck all the light out of the area. After that came beans and nuts, paid by the kilo, brains and genitalia in solution, fruits and vegetables, exactly what you think, and baked goods, again exactly what you think. I was also introduced to the rest of the staff, who all seemed pleased despite what was occurring around them. Then, on the second to last aisle, we came to one called butcher meat. I'd seen all types of human meat on the way there. What could this possibly be? It's not like it's an entirely new concept. My thought was abruptly caught off as I witnessed one of the most bizarre scenes I'd ever laid eyes on in my life. In front of me, instead of shelves, was a single row of something that resembled flesh. Meat, but not like what was being sold across the store. This was a solid wall of pulsating, bleeding offal. And I could see several people at the end trying in vain to escape out the other side, cowering in fear as tentacles of the stuff reached out and grabbed them, one by one, dragging them into the mass. Talk about consumer goods, the man said, wheezing with laughter. I'm sorry. I use that same stale joke every time. Is that where I'm going? I asked with some trepidation. He laughed again. Of course not, miss. We consider this our members only club, a premium shopping experience. But if you really want to, I won't object. I politely declined. The man then turned the opposite way and stopped, pointing at a shelf. There you have it, miss, he said cheerfully. I looked to where he was pointing. There were several opaque red jars stacked neatly across the shelf. I took the closest jar down and examined it, testing its weight. I spun it in my hands and looked at the label on the back. Ingredients: Herbert Cho, Herbert Danforth, Herbert Wellington, Herbert Vasquez. I screwed the lid and was greeted by the distinct pungent aroma of rotting eyeballs, glands and cartilage. I smiled. My informant's tip had not disappointed. Not at all. And you said you wanted some rosemary too? He grabbed another jar off the bottom shelf and handed it to me. It's a distinct flavour, but it pairs well with most spices. Yes, that'd be lovely, I said, screwing the lid back on, now with the same smirk I'd seen on the man's face when I entered. I'm sure my clients will be pleased. I'm sure they will, he grinned. We strolled over to the register and bagged the items. How much will that be? I asked. No charge, he said. First timers are free. That does rely on the promise of your continued business, however, and I must warn you, he gestured toward the aisles where a faint wailing can be heard. My fees are known to be steep. I smiled. I'll be sure to send my clients your way, I said. With that, I grabbed the bag and calmly pushed open the door, walking outside to my car. And with the familiar hollow ding of the bell, I saw out the corner of my eye that the sign on the door had flipped over to read closed. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed tonight's scary stories, then why not subscribe and click the like button and click the bell icon so you get notified every time I upload. And if you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.